Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
You're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics, your bite-sized guide to the corridors of power. I'm Yuan Potts.
And I'm Lizzy Burden. Welcome to the programme. Yuan, it is all change in Westminster, and that was evident yesterday on the first day of Parliament. I thought it was really striking to see the scale of Labour's victory on full display in the House of Commons when MPs took their seats. And while they're all busy finding their lockers, you've had some of them being picked for Starmer's GOAT cabinet, the government of all the talents, as it was known under Gordon Brown. Although some of them didn't make the draft, Emily Thornberry a notable exception. But what was also striking, apart from how many Labour MPs there were, was how diverse this Parliament is in terms of class and race and gender and sexuality. So really a new era in British politics.
Yeah, and real political diversity in the Commons as well. More than any Parliament I remember, really. 4 Green MPs, 5 from Reform on the other side of the political spectrum, and a cohort of independents, including Jeremy Corbyn. Not to mention, of course, the biggest third-party grouping in 100 years in the shape of 72 Liberal Democrats. Of course, first past the post has delivered Labour a chunky majority, so I don't think we'll be seeing many tight votes in the next couple of years, but we can expect them all to be giving voice to a much wider range of views.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about diversity on all fronts. But also, of course, we've got to talk about policy. Keir Starmer's had this 20-plus point poll lead for so many months, so plenty of time to plan for his first 100 days in office. And over the past couple of episodes, we've been keeping listeners abreast of that slew of policy measures announced in just this first week. We've had scoops on them from our excellent Bloomberg UK government team reporting on what to expect. And Keir Starmer has been in Washington since yesterday at the NATO summit, sounding pretty hawkish, saying that Ukraine can use British missiles to strike targets inside of Russia, which is a notably more decisive tone than Rishi Sunak, who didn't explicitly say that the weapons could be used to hit targets inside of Russia. But then you also had Starmer still holding this line that the UK won't commit 2.5% of GDP to defence spending until the public finances allow, even if he has promised more details on the time frame. It hasn't really gone unnoticed, I don't think, by Washington diplomats.
Yeah, another thing to find money for. And that's just the foreign policy front. We've had a flurry of announcements on domestic issues, all before the Starmers have even had a chance to unpack the boxes in number 10. Among them, scrapping the de facto onshore wind ban in England, ditching the Rwanda deportation scheme, and launching a £7 billion national wealth fund. Worth remembering that we're still less than a week into the new government. I think the volume of announcements, Lizzy, does suggest a fair amount of pre-planning has gone into these first 100 days. And that's before you even mention the meetings with the leaders of the nations and regions and the metro mayors and all those phone calls with the leaders of other countries. Blimey, it's all exhausting just talking about it. I think we need to bring someone else in to help, and who better than Bloomberg's UK politics editor, Alex Morales. Alex, the football's on tonight, so let's start with who's on the pitch and who's on the bench. Hat tip to Lizzy for that one. What were the big surprises for you? Obviously, we knew quite a lot about the big announcements that were coming. What were the more interesting ones?
The one big surprise at cabinet level, Lizzy's already touched on, was sort of a big snub for Emily Thornberry, who's been around for a long time. She's been the longest standing member of the shadow cabinet, actually, over the past period in opposition. She had been Shadow Attorney General, but was overlooked in favour of a human rights lawyer who Keir Starmer installed in the Lords to take up the position of Attorney General. That's a man called Richard Hermer, who's sort of famous for his cases against corporations and against the government, actually, on various things. So he was the biggest surprise. Emily Thornberry, I think she tweeted her reaction. She was clearly upset, although she acknowledged that he brings qualities to the role that she perhaps didn't.
I mentioned the goats as well, Alex. You've got the likes of James Timpson, who most people would know as a cobbler, appointed for prisons minister. What about these retreads, these experienced figures from governments past as well?
Well, James, you bring in, that's one of the more interesting appointments. It's not cabinet level, but he's been brought in as prisons minister. He's, as you said, he's famous for running this chain of companies for our international listeners. Timpson's is sort of a chain of they do shoe repairs and key cutting, and famously, whilst in charge of that company, he's brought in prisoners to sort of rehabilitate them and get them into the workforce. And he's now been brought in as prisons and probation minister. And that's clearly a signal of intent that Starmer wants to look at who we're sending to prison and whether there are better things we can do with them to train them up, to get them into jobs and to stop this recidivism. And so, reduce eventually the number of people who need to be sent to prison in the first place.
Because, of course, the prisons are overflowing.
Well, actually, I was just going to bring in the other interesting sort of junior ministerial appointment is Sir Patrick Vallance, who British people will know as the chief scientific advisor during the coronavirus pandemic. He was on our TV screens almost every day, a ubiquitous present. But clearly, Starmer's focus is on bringing expertise into these sort of key government roles, rather than political appointments who might not actually have much connection with the subject matter they're working in.
Yeah, I think quite a bold appointment on the prisons front, really, sort of a signalling of intent that the government intends to go down the path of reform, which is very much a break from the last government. I want to turn to the policy rollout. What are the standouts for you on that, Alex?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say it was standouts because actually I don't think they've done anything which they hadn't promised they were going to do. But certainly what's noticeable is the pace at which they're going. Pretty much as soon as he was appointed, the Defence Secretary was on a plane to Ukraine to announce a bit more aid and to reinforce the UK's support for Ukraine and say that's unchanging from the previous government. That's quite important from Labour's perspective, actually, because Rishi Sunak, the outgoing Conservative Prime Minister, and his team sort of made a big play on how the UK isn't going to be safe, how Labour couldn't be trusted with defence and security. So that's clearly an early marker on the board that Keir Starmer wanted to get. But there have also been announcements on... we've had Rachel Reeves on Monday announcing all these big planning reforms, which you alluded to in your intro. They've scrapped a sort of de facto ban on onshore wind, which hopefully opens up the way for a lot more green energy. And also they've promised to loosen planning restrictions that sort of prevent houses from going up, because that's been one of the big problems is the UK's not built enough houses for probably decades, actually.
So there's a policy blitz, the breadth is there, but what about the depth? Because, Alex, for so long, Labour carried this Ming vase, the poll lead masking quite a vague policy agenda. Are we actually getting the detail that we've waited for so long? Or, when we look towards the budget, I think we're expecting it in 10 weeks from the new Chancellor Rachel Reeves. Do you expect a surprise there, a BOE independence moment, a rabbit out of the hat?
I would be very surprised if there weren't a surprise in a Chancellor's first budget. You can imagine there will be some sort of rabbit. Now, what it is, it's hard to say because they spent the entire campaign being very reticent about various taxes that they weren't planning to raise and that their plans didn't require them to raise these taxes. But you can imagine that if they want to do a whole lot of spending stuff that will be sort of demanded by Labour grassroots, especially given the size of the majority, that the pressure will grow on Rachel Reeves. I mean, one thing I'd watch out for is there's this cap, the two-child benefit cap, which, again, they said during the campaign that they wouldn't remove. But it's something that really the grassroots feel very strongly about. There are all sorts of studies showing how much it would alleviate child poverty. It sort of presses all these Labour buttons. I would be very surprised if she hasn't done that by her second budget. Whether she has the leeway to do it in her first budget, I don't know.
That's interesting, because I think the cost of that is something like $1.5 billion, isn't it? Which is not huge in the scale of things. I just want to turn to foreign policy. Keir Starmer has really, not through his own doing, found himself as the kind of the grown-up in the room, hasn't he? He's turned up with, Biden's in trouble, Macron's in trouble, Scholz has got the tricky situation back in Germany. How is he going to take to that? It's weird to be a new leader, but sort of the person coming in with the strongest mandate, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, he's obviously in his honeymoon period. He's got a massive majority that, we haven't seen the likes of since 1997. He's clearly got a very strong mandate, if not percentage of the vote-wise, certainly seats in Parliament-wise, which is what Labour fought the election to win. So yes, and all these, as you said, all these other world leaders are struggling with their domestic situation at the moment. I feel like it's a status quo on UK foreign policy. He's coming in with the same priorities as Rishi Sunak had as Conservative. So he's not making grand changes. I guess the one place he will be making changes is he's going to be a bit more upfront about seeking closer ties with the EU. And I mean, we'll probably get onto this a bit later, but he wants to improve the security relationship. He wants to negotiate things that just ease trade a little bit more, bring them perhaps closer to what they used to be when the UK was an EU member. So there are all these things that he'll want to get on and do. But of course, if his negotiating counterparts are having problems, that may affect the pace at which he can do the stuff.
Yeah, Alex, this is one of the things that I'm complaining about. Labour were very cagey about how they were going to get closer ties with Europe before they were in government. Do we have more signs of what that relationship will look like now that they're in? Do we know what Starmer's priorities are going to be going into this European Political Community Summit next week?
The electorate may not have had clarity on what Starmer wanted to get out of Europe, but certainly his team have spent months and months and months meeting with different European governments, with European Union officials. So I think the UK's European counterparts will have an idea of the direction of travel that Starmer wants to head in. And it's perhaps more important that they know than that the UK electorate know. When it comes to the EPC summit next week, I mean, it's sort of it's not really a forum for negotiation, but obviously it's the classic talking shop. But it doesn't come out with communiques or agendas and things. So our understanding is that the UK is going to go there and present its sort of proposal for how a UK-EU security pact would look like. I don't think we have much more detail than that. But clearly that's an area that Starmer really wants to work much more closely with the EU on. And it stands in their benefit too, because the UK is one of the biggest defence spenders in Europe. Well, probably in absolute terms, it's the biggest in Europe. And so clearly that's something that is in the interest of both parties to sort of pin down. But when it comes to the European Union in general, I mean, we sort of know the areas that they want to get closer ties in. They want a veterinary agreement, which will help sort of ease the trade in fresh foods. They want to ease the ability of UK performers, because we've got a huge creative industry in this country, ease their ability to tour around Europe. So, there are sort of areas that can be topics for discussion.
Okay, Alex Morales, our Bloomberg UK politics editor, thanks for joining us. I think it's interesting to see when Starmer's happened to become the most powerful leader in NATO almost by accident, whether he's going to have more sway going forward, perhaps on Ukraine and the Israel-Hamas war. But that's all we've got time for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe and give it 5 stars so other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or wherever you listen.
This episode was produced by Tiwa Adebayo and our audio engineer was Sean Rostamaki. I'm Yuan Potts.
And I'm Lizzy Burden. We'll be back with more tomorrow. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg UK Politics. Listen weekdays at noon on DAB Digital Radio in London.